an impact driver, cordless impact driver, or do I use a combi or a drill driver instead? It's a very good question. Impact drivers are becoming much more commonly chosen now as a do-everything cordless drill driver, if you like. And in some countries in the world, sales of these things have even overtaken the humble cordless combi. But first tip is do not confuse an impact driver like this GDR with the Bosch model code there over a GSB, which can be referred to as an impact drill. I know they both have the word impact in the description, but they're very different indeed. The impact drill, that's describing the mode you'd use on your combi for drilling into brick and concrete, okay? And it makes that very famous sound, which I can quickly demonstrate on the bench here, for want of a better thing to do. Okay, so this is the impact mechanism on a combi, on a drill driver, which has got the impact function for drilling into masonry. You can hear that impact mechanism working, and the impact is acting in line with the drill bit. The impact is actually being applied straight ahead behind the drill bit to allow you to get into the brickwork. It's as simple as that. That's nothing to do with an impact driver. An impact driver, of course, turns a drill bit or a screwdriver bit or a little socket via normally a hex tool holder here. And this is a standard fitting with a ball locking groove so stuff doesn't fall out. But the impact is happening in a radial sense. Okay, so when you're tightening the screw or loosening the screw, the impact is happening in a rotary sense. There's nothing that would help you go into concrete with this, so it's not an impact drill. I can't overstress that. So before we go on, let's just have a quick look at the mechanism. This is a larger mechanism from an impact wrench, more about that in a moment, but it's just for illustration purposes to show you how it works. We've got this set up with a socket on the end. If you're going to use sockets on an impact wrench, by the way, make sure they're the thick walled ones suitable for impact wrenches, because these little chrome ones, they might look pretty and are quite cheap to buy. You will split them on a powerful impact wrench if you're using it for bolting, but we'll go back to the mechanism. So what we've got inside is a very simple mechanism. It's a striker. This heavy weight here is a striker, and attached to the striker or influenced by the striker is a smaller part here which we call the anvil, and you can guess how they work. So if you like, this is the hammer and that's the anvil that the hammer hits. So when there's no resistance to driving a screw, maybe you're driving a screw into a piece of soft wood, then impact drivers and cordless impact wrenches as well have a very high rotational speed, which is fantastic. They really do run some fairly significantly long screws in quite quickly until the material puts up a fight. It starts to put the brakes on. It becomes resistant to the screw being driven in. Then this mechanism comes into its own. So we've got a simple bolt arrangement here, okay, which we put into the socket, and you can see if I now start to turn this by hand, that initially there's no impacting taking place at all, okay? And the bolt's going in very easily, just taking up the slag into the metal plate. Now it's gone tight, and you can see that the striker is, just a moment, the striker is trying to move back. Okay, it's camming backwards. It's on a spring, okay? And what happens is it then slides over the end of the anvil with a clunk, and it keeps on doing that. Okay, so it's tightening in a series of shocks, if you like, or impacts. Now, I've only just done that by hand a couple of times, and already if I try to loosen this bolt with a conventional spanner, you know, I'm having trouble doing that. So essentially what that mechanism's done for you, and we've all done it, haven't we? If we're doing a bit of home mechanics or under the bonnet of the car, then were the days. If you have a stubborn bolt that you want to loosen, or you want to get it super tight and you don't have a very long spanner, what we tend to do is we fit a spanner and we hit the end of it with a hammer. And that's exactly what an impact driver or an impact wrench does for you. So it's producing a huge amount of torque potentially, but in a series of mechanical impacts or hammer blows, if you like. So what's the benefit then of using an impact driver for driving screws, for example? Well, it can develop a huge amount of tightening force or loosening force. So if you've got a stubborn screw you want to take out, you're more likely to be able to shock it loose with an impact driver over a regular drill driver. Downside is very, very heavy on screwdriver bits, for example. So if you're using standard screwdriver bits, these sort of gunmetal grey ones, these hardened ones, which are great for regular screwdrivers, they do tend to wear out quite quickly. So you should always consider using impact resistant screwdriver bits like these Bosch ones, which you can see have got a wasted portion in the middle. It goes thinner in the middle. This acts like a torsion bar and will take some of the shock, the mechanical shock, out between the machine and the screwdriver bit. And these will last obviously a lot longer used with impact drivers than with a standard screwdriver bit. So if you want to save money, it's worth investing in some kind of impact resistant screwdriver bit set. Okay, but benefits, well, first of all, if you're driving a large screw or perhaps turning a big drill bit with a drill driver, you do tend to get reactive torque. So if you're driving a large auger bit or a large screw, when the screw goes tight, the machine tends to react and tends to twist your arm. With an impact driver, there is no reactive torque. So even if you're naughty up a set of steps and you're using an impact driver, maybe at arm's length, even when that bolt or that screw goes tight onto the bracketry, what have you, there is no tendency for the machine to kick backwards and possibly throw you off balance or injure your wrist. So there's a plus side. Yeah. So what about drilling? Well, you can drill with these, of course. We have drill bits with a hex shank there, so they're pretty good for working with wood drill bits. There are steel drill bits available for them, including for stainless steel. So they are generally a good all-rounder. There's no need for a 2-speed gearbox because they are delivering torque as and when it's needed. There is no torque control. So if it's a torque-sensitive application, then you might want to check how tight you've tightened the bolt. But just keep it in perspective. You know, torque, it's numbers, it's Newton meters, and there's some big numbers attached to these, like 110, 130, 150, 250 Newton meters. There are very, very few applications, certainly not driving screws into wood, where you need anything like that tightening power. So the other tip I would say is get some practice with this first, because you can overdo it. You can break the heads off of screws if they're cheap screws. You can chew out the head, which won't please your boss. Okay, if he comes around and looks at your handiwork when there's just craters in the top. And so, yeah, and you can strip the threads, of course. So if you're using screws going into MDF or chipboard or what have you, it's really easy to overcook it, shall we say. And don't forget, there are some quite dinky little impact drivers. This is one of our 12-volt brushless machines. Fantastic. It's rated at 110 Newton meters. Phenomenal for such a tiny, tiny tool. So more and more choice available for you guys. But you know what I would say? Also have a combi in the toolkit too. These are great as a combination kit, 2 tools in one box. And then you've got the benefits of the masonry drilling capabilities here. If you want to use torque control, you can use that. And you know, the usual party piece with impact drivers is driving in really long screws like this, these frame fixing screws or wood fixing screws. This is normally a party piece, but yeah, be careful. You know, you're talking about over 100 Newton meters on an impact driver, but actually this combi in first gear will beat this one, the impact driver, when driving this long screw. I can demonstrate that if you wish. The other thing, of course, is if you want really big torque, if maybe you're maintaining garden machinery, maybe you're a maintenance person, you're working on conveyor belts, racking, where there are bolts, nuts and bolts, then an impact driver is not really the best bet, because you do get a limiting factor through the fact that you're using accessories with a 1/4 inch hex. This is really not a lot of metal, so what tends to happen is that mechanism I showed you earlier is really thumping the output spindle here, but of course you get this kind of torsion bar effect. Even the screw becomes a torsion bar. So you're thumping away at this end and the screw is actually twisting, and it's almost like you're hitting a spring with a hammer. So the actual torque that's being applied to the thread is quite small if it's being applied in sharp shocks. You get what I mean? So if you're using a regular drill driver that is delivering the torque in a linear fashion by turning gears, you can sometimes get a faster fixing done with a straightforward drill driver. Maybe I should demonstrate that. Let's just put the socket there. We've got an 8mm socket there. Also impact resistance, impact control. We're going to drive this long screw in to the wood. Maybe we can just do it on this end and just have a look at the progress. Okay, so this one's rated at 160 Newton meters. So you think this will be going in like crazy, but when it starts to impact, other downside, of course, of impact drivers, they're quite noisy, but you can use ear defenders. Let's see how we get on. Now you can see at this point it's already slowing down. The screw's quite deeply embedded into the beam here. So I'm just literally going to take this accessory off and fit it into this little combi, and this little combi is probably rated at around about 60 Newton meters maximum torque, so it's nowhere near on paper as torquey as the impact driver, but we're in first gear and drilling mode, so we're using the low gear to give us a decent amount of torque, and just see the difference. Okay, so it's actually significantly quicker because it's not applying the torque in little pulses. Does that make sense? So impact driver, fantastic. Impact wrench with a square drive here. That's the only difference between an impact wrench and an impact driver. The output spindle is a 1/2-inch square drive. If you're into mechanics, you'll know that's a typical fitting on the back of a socket. And of course, being a bigger spindle, more mass there, these can deliver those big numbers. So if you do need to bolt things down really, really firmly, or you're putting wheels on vehicles, this sort of stuff, bearing in mind you can't limit or adjust the torque on an impact wrench or an impact driver. It's a little bit like this, so be careful. But the impact wrench will do that job for you if you're into bolting. But what if you want the best of both worlds? Well, you've got two choices really. You can fit an adapter. There are accessories available. So if you have a GDS, for example, this is an impact wrench, and you want to run the occasional screw in that's obviously needs a screwdriver bit with a hex fitment, then you simply put this adapter on the end, and now you can put regular screwdriver bits and do the same sort of stuff we've done before. But remember, you've got a very powerful machine and you are driving a little screw, so give it a chance. Don't be too trigger happy. Get a bit of practice. Gives you a bit of extra versatility. Bosch, being quite clever, thought about this a while ago, and we've actually got a best of both worlds, if you like, machine in the shape of the GDX products, because this one has, as you can see, a square drive on the spindle here, but inside you have a 1/4-inch hex as well, so you don't need to buy the adapter. You can drive screws or run sockets as well. A little bit fancier, of course. It has some of the GDX models have selectable speeds which have an effect on the total torque, but again, it's not torque control. So you've got quite a choice there really, but I'm hoping that gives you an idea about impact drivers. They're not impact drills. Don't use them for drilling into brick and masonry, and there's certainly a home, I think, in a typical tradesman's toolkit for a decent combi, okay, and an impact driver. So have fun. Hope that's been useful for you.